that. So how often do you all find yourselves going to the federal government, knowing someone may be ripe for retirement or lured to the private sector because they've got a security clearance already, which can easily be transferred?
Often, although it really depends on, to your point about reciprocity earlier, where are they coming from? If they're coming from, they're an Army major that's retiring, and I've got to put them at CIA, I may or may not get any real benefit from that. I might be better off hiring from one of my colleagues that already has someone at CIA, paying him $10,000 or $20,000 more, and having them go right into the job.
I interrupted you, though. You were going to comment on.
Sure. So, companies like Mantech and Kevin Phillips' leadership in this space, and organizations that have been mentioned like the Professional Services Council with Mr. Berto and his leadership, and the Intelligence and National Security Alliance, have been critical voices for particularly those of us in small business, because they can pool the concerns and deliver a consolidated message to the executive branch of Congress. And so I just like to give a shout out to the industry associations that have been so vocal and helpful to us as small business.
And if I can, sir, initially, what you probably can see today, a lot of us, we've been working this since 2016. When the CEOs came together, we were calling the process a Security Campaign Committee, which consisted of 15 companies and 6 agencies, which we keep looking over to our distinguished colleague to our right, but also NBTC and other agencies out there near and dear to everybody. So as you see going forward, we're doing this in concert. We're not speaking as one or representing one company.
I've never heard from NBTC in this subject.
Well,
I have from PSC.
I will serve from Senator Warner's standpoint. We've been invited numerous times to have this discussion. So NBTC through Senator Warner on the SISI side, yes, sir.
Well, the Committee of Jurisdiction is not. Last time I checked, our committee has jurisdiction.
And then I hope, sir, the other item is we mentioned, we provided solutions from an industry perspective to reduce the backlog and to go forward for reciprocity or transfer of trust. We're also preparing a paper now, sir, to go forward to the respective committees. I think it actually went out last week on information sharing. Because when we went to the Navy Yard, when we were talking about that, man, we think the most critical part now, particularly from an insider threat perspective, is that information sharing. Part of Trusted Workforce 2.0 is trust us. We will protect the data. We understand the privacy. We will protect the data. We just want to ensure that we can look at our enterprise IT infrastructure and supply chain as well. Since a lot of this technology resides with us, just give us the opportunity to make sure our hygiene is secure as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
we are entering the appropriation process now in the Congress, so we're going to hear from the agencies next. But I've been struck by the concern about staff shortages that, for example, in polygraph, one or two people. So we of course are the authorizing, but it does seem to me that this is the time to strike while the iron is hard. How much of this is staff shortage? How much of this is efficiency? How much of this is repeating the same work over again? Parsing that out and looking to see what piece of this we can move forward right now.
I agree. And in fact, I would invite people around this table, but maybe PSC can help take the lead. In what are those, not the laundry list, but let's prioritize the top 5 or 6 or whatever it is that we think would make a difference, because Eleanor and I both sit on the Oversight and Reform Committee. We have an annual hearing with GAO on the high-risk categories of federal issues, and this is now one of them, which is progress. So we've got GAO's support and interest, and we can, working with them as partners, we can try to leverage the appropriations process where the appropriations bill is a solution or a path to a solution. So I invite you certainly to do that. Mr. Torres?
Yeah, if I could take just a few minutes to actually make a couple of recommendations.
Absolutely.
So there are questions certainly about how things are going now. Clearly on the DoD side, they have gotten control of the inventory. People are worried about the 200,000 number. I would say don't worry about the number, worry about the speed. And speed is getting better. We can tell you that from our perspective, what the government is saying is how long it's taking on the DoD side for the investigation is accurate, but as we discussed, there's more to it than just the investigation piece. But here's the piece that's missing. When you look at the Performance Accountability Council data over on the website, they're doing by the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004 metrics. Those metrics only measure the fastest 90%. So when you get your numbers on how long things are taking, they're only telling you the fastest 90%. They do over 700,000 clearance investigations a year. So that means 70,000 investigations, you're not seeing how long they're taking every year. So my recommendation would be, is that great, tell us how fast the 90% is, but give us the rest of the story, because when you guys keep hearing it's taking a long time, you're hearing 70,000 examples of, well, that's only 10%, but that's a lot of examples. So once you see the rest of the data,
Can I just piggyback off of you? So, Mr. Chairman, this is where I would recommend to you that from the Security Act, 2018, where these agencies now report on a quarterly basis of these metrics, I would recommend you, sir, and your committee to have open hearings and invite them down to speak to their quarterly metrics and what's driving it, even if you see efficiencies or resources from appropriations, and then please invite industry as well. So then we can show, because we are also running metrics. We run Tiger teams with the PAC PMO, who's represented here as well, but we can give you from our perspective the true definition of when somebody is initiated until they're actually on contract. Thank you, Greg. I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, thanks for that. So that's one piece of it. The DoD investigation is going well. The intelligence community, generally speaking, it's a very, very mixed bag. So we need to be able to see that data carved out of the reporting separately so that we can actually make a judgment on that, because we can tell you what we see, but there's nothing to compare it to at this time.
And by the way, just on reporting, remember what I said in my opening statement, I got an amendment to the NDAA that requires all agencies to provide a report, and the first one is due 2 months from now.
We are looking forward to
So
that.
we are too, and that report may allow us then to build on other requirements of information. Hopefully it will be a tool to goad people into knowing, well, geez, if I have to report by April, I better have something to report.
And Mr. Chairman, two things. One is, when you receive that report, if it says for official use only, would you please send it back and ask them to take that off and release it publicly?
Yeah.
And the second is, the first report's important. The second report is even more important, because what you want to do is give them an incentive not to come back and say it got worse. You want to give them an incentive to come back and say it got better.
That's right. And we also want to, forgive me for interrupting, Mr. Torres, but one of the things we do in government is we often adopt metrics that are easy to measure and achieve. So I can remember certain metrics about, say, cybersecurity. And the metric we adopted was education and training. And people would come with great pride saying 95% of our workforce has been educated and trained. They went through the course. I think, well, but the object is to lower the number of successful hacking attempts. And of course, those numbers were going up, but we weren't measuring that, because that's a lot harder to get our arms around. So we also want to make sure we don't fall into the trap of measuring the wrong things. I'm sorry, Mr. Torres.
No, that's okay. And so just one kudos shout out to the government, and then one more recommendation. And the kudo is, in the recommendations we made, many people don't know that the adjudication criteria that are used to make a top secret determination and a top secret SCI determination are now identical. Yet the government on the DoD side was making two separate determinations at two different times. We asked them to stop doing that in the recommendations. They executed that. The outcome of that is that before they changed early last year in November, only 30% of the top secret investigation were getting a top secret SCI moniker adjudication, only 30%. That is now up to 83%, which means that we have a better pool to pull from, and you're more efficient on the government side, not going back to that same investigation twice. So shout out to the DOD, CAF, for making that change. That's outstanding. And the last thing is just a recommendation. We also made the recommendation that going to reciprocity, that even in the ODNI's own policy, it says that adjudicated decisions will be housed centrally so that people can see them. And when you go to a database like Scattered Castles, which is the intelligence community's repository, all you can see is the person SCI cleared or not? If they're under an exception, and many people are, you can't tell. So that causes a delay. You move somebody with an exception. So what they do is they say, okay, well, this person was an exception in DIA, so NGA says, I need to order a copy of the original investigation, wait for that to come to us in the mail so that I can read the investigation. We recommended to them that, why is it that every intelligence agency cannot log into the other intelligence agency system, read what the issue was, read what the concern was, and make a decision from that? They could do that today with a pen, with a username and password on the high side, log in and see it. They'd be able to make decisions in minutes rather than weeks. So those are just one
Well, now you're
recommendation.
talking crazy.
I know.
Something we could do overnight, I mean,
That's just crazy. Thank you.
I say we need a task force for that.
Ms. Brackett, do you want to?
And it's not only that, but they have visibility to each other, visibility for industry as well, because as we're pre-screening personnel, we're not acting as adjudicators, but we're looking at timelines and how quickly can we get this
Right.
support to support the mission. And so we also need higher visibility within those systems. We did it one time, and giving personnel, highly cleared personnel, access to those will help us present people forward that won't be the problematic
To be
cases.
specific, I'm
It-
sorry, we need level 10 access to
Yes,
Scattered
let's be
Castles.
specific and scattered castles.
Because the government says, give us the person that has a good investigation, a good polygraph, and they're in scope, and there's no exception. We can't see that.
We can't.
So since they won't let us see that, we give them somebody, they then fail us on our security volume and say, you failed the criteria, go try again. So the person that we all made an offer to, we now have to say, well, never mind, we didn't know, now we gotta go try to hire somebody else. So they're concerned that if we have that level of visibility, we'll start trolling the database and stealing people from the government.
Mr. Chairman, if you're looking for easy solutions, some of the quick, easy solutions for how we can resolve some of these issues, that's one of them. That visibility piece is one of them. And the other comment I have is, to your point, Mr. Torres, in looking at the reports and the metrics, I think the devil is in the details. And if we look at the backlog that's shrunk to almost its steady state within DoD, I think we need to look at, are there any ripple effects from some of the measures that were taken to get that backlog down? For example, the assignment of cases of PRs deferred to continuous vetting or continuous evaluation. DoD is the only entity at this time that is deferring reinvestigations. We have other agencies that may not necessarily accept reinvestigations. They might initiate them. NRO is one of them. They're initiating them as needed. But what does that do to someone who's deferred and trying to move to another agency? We have clarifying guidance that clearances don't expire and that reciprocity is still supposed to be applied when someone is deferred, but we do not see this accepted across the board. So what are we doing to the population if one agency is doing one action to clear the backlog that might affect personnel moving to other agencies? Because if we talk about threat, when we talk about existing or accepting risk, let's talk about personnel who have supported the government faithfully, been cleared, who through no fault of their own lose coverage, can't move to another contract, and suddenly they have this information. And their career might be on hold or it might be wiped out. That to me is a greater threat that we have to assess than the maybe the lone wolf.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to follow up on what some of my colleagues were talking about when it comes to information sharing. Because I think one of the things the government is starting to get right is an understanding that industry is a key stakeholder in this. And the more information that you share with us, the better we can support you. DCSA has started sharing with the NISPAC monthly data, I mean a lot of data on charts that show the current status of each case type across the country in different geographic population areas. very, very detailed data, and they've been sharing this for about a year. And to Ms. Bracken's point, when we see that data month after month after month, we can give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down on, yeah, that's what we're seeing in industry as well. Or there's a serious disconnect. There might be something like Mr. Torres mentioned, where the government's reporting something, but what they're reporting doesn't cover what we look at. So I think the more information that we can get on the status of our cleared populations that are in the investigation phase, where they are in the adjudication phase, maybe the due process phase, or even where they are in the contracting officer controlled phase on the contract, the better we're all gonna be.
I just wanted to add, what I've seen also in terms of being a small business is, this is agency specific when it comes to crossover lags. We've got people who have been supporting, let's say, the agency, CIA, and their clearance was in scattered castles, and if they leave that position and they try to transfer to another agency, typically what's supposed to happen is that they're good to go with their clearance and polygraph for up to 2 years. What happens is that 1 year after they have been removed from that position at the agency, they're completely taken out. And guess what? If they supported the agency, they're not going to be in JPAS, which is DOD. You can't see them anywhere. So it looks as if they never had a clearance at all. Well, that's not fair. That's not right. How do we fix that? I think that what my colleagues have been mentioning in terms of what the process is and policy, that it has to be consistent, and it has to be consistent across agencies. It can't be agency specific where it's DOD or it's one of the other intelligence agencies or it's Homeland Security or even Department of Energy with Q clearances. It can't be that way. It has to be consistent across the board. And if it's not, then we're going to continue to run into these challenges where the government is going to continue to spend additional money because of the lag.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, absent that consistency across the board, reciprocity makes no sense. There is no reciprocity. We can recognize that there may be individual limited examples of additional or more in-depth requirements because of the nature of the work of the agency. If I'm worried about security, intelligence kinds of issues, my foreign travel may be far more important than if I'm getting a desk job at a civilian agency that may require security clearance. Let me ask something that you all have not addressed. That's fine. Maybe it's not on the radar scope, but from your point of view, was the decision to move security clearance responsibility from OPM to you? Yeah, that was Alan's question too. Because on our committee, we had real doubts about this. Because DOD couldn't do the job before. So to actually now give the whole Megillah to DOD, from our point of view on our committee, was a dubious proposition. How is it, and by the way, one other thing, and you're Air Force, so you don't count. But there was a concern that by doing this, DOD is not an impartial entity, right? So when we're looking at security clearances, the fear was DOD would just so happen to prioritize DOD security clearance requirements, and CIA and other agencies could kind of fall in the second tier. Have those fears materialized? Is it working well? Do you care?
Mr. Chairman, I'll start, because I know Mr. Torres is going to jump in as well, but from an industry perspective.
Speak up a little bit.
From an industry perspective, sir, our one recommendation, it doesn't matter if it was an OPM or if it's DOD, our recommendation back in 2016 was, but keep it together. If you remember, initially, they were going to split it, where if my numbers are right, DOD had about 70%. So 70% of NBIB at the time was going to go to DOD without the backlog, or the inventory that we're talking about today, which meant NBIB was going to have 30% of the workforce, but yet still maintain that backlog and try to bring it down. So from this whole security reform campaign that we had, our only recommendation, sir, was to keep it intact. But I can tell you from what we're seeing as it's moved over, again, the communication and the partnership that we're seeing with DCSA and others has been fantastic.
David, do your members what feedback are you getting from your members?
So we took the position.
How many members has PSC got?
About 430, including most of the folks at this table. And I would, first off, Mr. Congressman, I would want to accept your offer that we will gather with everybody here and put those priorities together for you and get those, as we did last May when you had a similar roundtable on the impacts of the shutdown.
Right.
And we pulled those recommendations together.
And oh, by the way, that was not for naught. Ellen, I think you would agree too. I think we've made some real progress in Congress in educating members about, it's not just federal employees who are affected by shutdowns.
Right.
And we have an obligation to be concerned about that. And we actually made some progress, even legislatively. We haven't got all the way there. But that's the first time that members of Congress, because Mr. Torres talked a little bit earlier about the attitude sometimes about, that's not my problem. Many members of Congress shared that too in terms of, well, they're just Beltway bandits and who feels sorry for them. And I think we've really come a long way in educating colleagues about that's really a pretty prejudicial point of view and not helpful in terms of getting the work of the government done.
I agree, and hopefully we can continue focusing here, as you have so far, on getting the results rather than only an input. But with respect to, and I would echo sort of what Mr. Krause said, you know, when USIS contract fell apart, the backlog began to skyrocket over at OPM. When the OPM hack occurred and it created an additional risk-averse mentality there, the solution that might have made sense in 2003 or 2005, which was to move activities over from DoD to OPM, might not have made as much sense. If you look at what the administration looked at, they actually looked at three options. Option one was to consolidate, leave background investigation consolidated at OPM under the new National Background Investigation Bureau, which was stood up. Option two was to move it all back to DoD. Option three was actually to create a separate new entity with the sole responsibility of maintaining that support, not only for security clearances, but for the suitability determinations that take place in the hundreds of thousands of employees elsewhere in the federal government who may not have requirements to have security clearances, but do have to have a suitability determination that they're able to do their jobs. PSC, at that point, supported the idea of a separate agency. But separate new agencies has not been a popular approach to anything in the federal government, regardless of administration, for quite a number of years now. So that was never given full scope. It was actually reconsidered as part of the decision in the President's management agenda to follow what the law said, which was move DoD's piece back. It was reconsidered inside the Office of Management and Budget and was rejected for a variety of reasons that were not made public. So of the options available, that is, have them split between two activities or have them consolidated within one activity, given that the statutory requirements already said DoD's got to take over its responsibility, that passed the Congress by a wide margin and was signed by the President. We felt that if 70%'s got to go to DoD, let's go ahead and do the rest because it is a whole of government solution.
That's Mr. Krause's point of view too.
Right, and I would note that the initial, I mean, I had some same skepticism. You know, how many examples do you have where DoD is serving all the other 105 activities across the federal government with equal priority to themselves here? And there are not a lot of such examples because DoD's got its own job and they have to do it well. But I would say in the initial stages that we've seen here, we are not hearing from the other federal agencies that they're being short-circuited. I think your committee is in a unique position to make sure that those folks have the opportunity and perhaps even the mandatory need to let you know how it's going from their perspective. From our perspective, it's off to a good start.
Yeah. Well, that's actually good news. Our fears have not materialized so far, and as I said in my opening statement, the reports are the transition's gone fairly smoothly.
But keep your eye on it.
And I'll add that I was there for the conversations. I was still in government when we were debating this. So that was really the outcome. If you were going to go ahead and do that split, you would have to have two IT systems, one there, one here. Then the DoD would be competing against OPM for investigators. You'd have different rates and different costs, and it just didn't seem to make sense. So the keeping it all together made sense, and understanding how the work within NBIB then and now DCSA works. I don't foresee any challenge with particular agencies getting shortchanged or not being prioritized. There are groups that meet on a regular basis to talk about that work across the government. But if it starts happening, people will know very, very quickly.
Jeff?
Mr. Sherman?
Yes, Ms. Lee.
I forgot to add that I'm a service disabled veteran.
I've got to ask you to speak a little louder.
Can you hear me now? Is this better? Okay. We're a service disabled veteran-owned small business, woman-owned small business, and we've had some experience with DCSA. I would say that in the last 3 or 4 months, we've noticed accelerated processing from them, and I think they were overwhelmed and challenged, but somehow they made it come together. We are providing services to them in another area. Now, if they could just get that straight and pay me, I would be very happy. But I think for the most part, we've noticed improvement in the processing timelines.
Super, okay. So, I guess one other thing on my list, and we have to, we touched on it, but in terms of backlog, in terms of timeliness, the background investigation is one thing. Getting it all done, the polygraph, everything, that's in this bucket. But adjudication is something else. And what's, just real briefly, anyone want to talk a little bit about how is adjudication working relative to the initial background security clearance?
I'll say that it's all over the map. I will say that in the case that you have, they were doing well for a while. They are slipping a little bit right now. I don't know why, but the goal to be under 20 days for that, they are not there for industry. So somebody needs to understand why that might be. Some people were calling it I'll use this term, it's the term used in the government, the pig in the python. You went ahead and sped up investigations tremendously and started pushing all this stuff downstream, and now there's a logjam at the bottom end. So we need to understand better how that's going. Each of the intelligence agencies, their adjudications are also over the map. There's one intel agency that I know it takes them about 2 to 3 months to do an adjudication. So really, to read the document, 2 to 3 months. There's another organization in the intelligence community that if your investigation is completed and it's coded as there's nothing to be concerned here, they stick it in a safe and don't adjudicate it, and their backlog is over 2 years. So they think, well, it doesn't matter because you're working for us. But now we want to move that person from that organization to another organization. They say, where's the new adjudication? And the other organization says, well, call us and then we'll do it.
Yeah.
So from my experience, what we're seeing is that the adjudication piece is all over the map.
So that is of concern to us. It seems like it's self-defeating if we can speed up and expedite and streamline the process of background checks, great. But if the adjudication, nothing happens, nothing's improved in the adjudication, it seems self-defeating. We need to make progress on both. And we can't have, going back to your point, it's got to be it's not only going to be sort of a uniformity across the board in terms of standards and acceptance, but we can't have all over the map on adjudication because we've got to have a standard of efficiency that people have to meet on adjudication as well. Do you want to comment?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I think from the folks that I spoke with in industry, when the investigation backlog started to come down, I think there was universal concern that it was going to be that pig in the python effect and it would hit the calf. I think the fact that it hasn't happened that way is a testament to the folks that found a lot of creative ways to work through it. And I think another interesting metric was in around December, if you'll recall, there were these deferred investigations or deferred adjudications. So the investigation had been completed, but they hadn't conducted the adjudication because they enrolled folks in continuous vetting. So they were kind of buying down that risk of not conducting the full adjudication by putting them into continuous vetting. In December, they worked off the CAF, the DoD CAF, the DCSA, worked off about 80,000 cases in less than 3 weeks. So can it be done? Absolutely. Was it done well? I hope so, but the fact that they could get through that massive number of cases in so short a period, I think is a testament to the workforce.
Although we are reminded of Ms. Norton's caution that what could go wrong in really speeding up 80,000 background checks and security clearances in a 3-week period or whatever it may be. We do want to make sure we're taking care to try to limit that risk while we're doing it. That's always going to be a challenge and a balance. Eleanor, anything else to go to the order?
No, I'm interested in whether this continuous vetting could be useful. But that's something to find out.
I mean, continuous vetting in an ideal world makes, of course, sense. But there are privacy concerns. Just how intrusive can government be in monitoring your life during the pendency of your security clearance? How much am I entitled to know about your use of social media, about all of your financial transactions, about your debt, about your personal life, I mean, there are lots of issues here that in a democracy, we need to always be concerned about. And that's also going to be a balancing act. Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I think a lot of us have worked on the social media, publicly available electronic information space and share your concerns about the limits of that. And I just say, our adversaries don't have that limitation. And so I think that being able to understand what the Russians or the Chinese could know about our own cleared population is important for our government to be able to know as well.
Absolutely.
Within the limits.
Yeah.
And from a perspective of what has already happened, the Department of Defense, as you know, has been doing continuous evaluation now for multiple years. So this isn't new to them. And before I left, we enrolled 1.2 million people. The outcome of that was that, as you mentioned before, we were previously waiting 5, 6, or 10 years to check up on our folks, and we were finding the issues of concern years ahead of when we would otherwise do. And the benefit to that, quite frankly, is the similar reason why many of these firms here have our own internal continuous evaluation programs, because we're able to help our employees. We're able to identify risks and challenges that they may be facing alone, and now we can give them employee assistance programs and help them with SoFi resources to refinance if they're having difficulties. Again, saving the employee, making it good for them, benefiting security. So far, my opinion is the continuous evaluation, continuous vetting is good, but as my colleagues have said, there's more to that story on, what might we lose by not knocking on a neighbor's door every 5 years, if that were the approach. So good news so far, but more to see.
Yeah. I think that's right. Anyone else want to add anything before we? So we have some assignments. Eleanor and I are going to look at legislative routes once you get to us with, and Mr. Torres, I invite you, let's work with you directly on the 14-point recommendations. You pointed out only 3 of which have been implemented, so we'll be glad to work with you on what do we need to do to have all of them implemented. But I am interested in, obviously, issues of reciprocity and adjudication, but also these bottlenecks. There may be some shortcuts that help the process. They're not going to be a panacea, but why ignore them if they're readily at hand, and we could at least fix that or address that. That would help move things along. And I'm always interested in those kinds of solutions as well. Thank you all so much for participating today. This is a very important topic, and I assure you that the regional delegation is very much on our minds, and we're going to continue to make sure it's an issue before our colleagues in Congress. Thank you, and this roundtable is adjourned.